Hey guys, so it's been way too long since I've done anything here. It's been over 2 weeks, closer to 3. I know we had the holidays, New Year's obviously, and Christmas, and they're a hard time for all of us. I kept meaning to do something, something relevant, something I still might get around to, but just reading through more of the comments on the Halo 3 ODST video that I looked at a month or two ago, and one more recent commenter talked about his dad dying recently, and made me think of this song from NF that I've also been meaning to get around to. Anyway, it's on my list of, I don't know, dozen and a half things to get to, and I really need to get myself in the habit and the sleep schedule and the rest of it, obviously. So thank you for you guys that are here and that stick around through the duration of this video. Obviously I'm going to be talking about God and how he and being Christian relates to these things, and if as a professed Christian I think we can go a little bit maybe deeper into not guessing about certain things in his lyrics. And as you can see, I finally got some of my background set up. When I do a video that doesn't have the reaction, I'll be out of the way and you can see my other credential junk that I'm currently in front of. But anyway, glad to see you guys, and thanks for commenting, those of you that have, and let's go from here. Let's dig into this thing.
How could you leave so unexpected? We waited.
Already, the way this is drawn out, it's like almost like a cry, like a mournful, a lament, that's the word, which obviously makes sense, but it's cool that it starts that way, and it contrasts in the video with something that, sort of apparently happy thing going on that presumably is a memory. Oh man. I've seen this video a couple times, but back in 2009, I was going through my mom's house that she had sort of abruptly left, and had moved out of state, but a bunch of the stuff was still there, and I was just going through the stuff she had left there, and there was this like a cheap plastic toolbox that I saw. I'm like, oh, what's in there? And there are these pill bottles that I'd never seen before, but I knew exactly what they were, because my stepdad had they were just some herbal supplements that he had taken, but he had a poor reaction to them, to some of their side effects, and they ended up giving him really high blood pressure, and he died from cerebral hemorrhaging. That was on like Easter weekend of 2006. So just seeing those pill bottles there, cause I'd heard the name of them. My mom had said the name of them. I'd never seen them, but then I saw the things and the bottles, and I saw the name, and like that, maybe 3 years later, but man, that 3.5 years later, just seeing this now, and this is a decade later, it's just still this pit in my stomach around it. I don't know why I hadn't made the connection here before. I guess because the circumstances were a bit different, but just that shot with the pills laying open. Jeez.
Yo, I don't know what it's like to be addicted to pills, but I do know what it's like to be a witness that kills. Mama told me she loved me. I'm thinking this isn't real. I think of you when I get a whiff of that cigarette smell. Yeah. Welcome to the bottom of hell. They say pain is a prison. Let me out of my cell. You say you proud of me, but you don't know me that well. Sit in my room, tears running down my face, and I yell.
I mean, there's so much going on here. It's hard to even pick apart with the line. They say pain is a prison. Let me out of my cell. I don't know if I mean, getting kind of the gist of how people react to this song a lot of times, and just a lot of advice that tends to be given. There is almost like some, a lot of victim blaming that tends to happen. So like accusing someone of being in pain for too long or grieving for too long. And especially I think in the church, in Christian settings, where we know sin is a prison that we hold up ourselves, or very often do, then it's just a natural argument of people to effectively say, well, hurry up and get over it. No one can help you out of it. You're just doing it yourself. But this is the thing about prison. Even if you're holding up the bars, you're still there. And I mean, that gets at the nature of sin itself, and that even if it's something that we sometimes perpetuate, that that it's an internal thing, and like a product of our will, not just something that we're facing outwardly. It's still not something we can just wantonly overcome because we choose to. And if we could just overcome sin by choice, then I mean effectively we wouldn't have a fallen nature, and we wouldn't need a savior at all. And I think practically speaking, we wouldn't need therapy, we wouldn't really need friends or family. We can just kind of get over things ourselves and deal with them ourselves, and that's the end of it. And clearly that isn't the case. But so often, from the outside looking in, this is what we hear anyway, and it's really destructive.
Into my pillowcases, say you coming to get us, then call a minute later just to tell us you're not. I'm humiliated. I'm in a room with the parent that I don't barely know. Some lady in the corner watching us while she's taking notes.
Whoa, I never really. Okay, so they're being observed at their house. It reminds me of a number of times, at least 2 or 3, maybe more. CPS would come to our house, and it was not a great place, but they never did anything anyway. It reminds me of the sort of parental support groups that I don't know if they were supposed to be for the kids, but us kids were too young really to even know what was happening. Parents United, I think that's what it was called. I don't know how widespread that is or was, or if it's a thing anymore or not, whatever. And the thing about the cigarettes too, I think that's interesting. I think you every time there's that cigarette smell, it doesn't really seem to be something necessarily negative, and I think that's kind of a cool perspective that is lost a lot of times, especially twofold. One, just the world in general is moving away from cigarettes. It's horrible and addictive and bad for you, and you shouldn't do it, and it's abusive to other people around you. Okay, but also, in the church it's been a thing, at least parts of the church it's been a thing for longer, and the more traditional aspects or sides of it, conservative sides of it, has always been, anti-smoking, anti-cigarette, or at least has been for a very long time. And this doesn't seem to be that. At least I don't take it that way. I think it's more of just this is a thing, and it reminds me of you. And that, I think, it gets to the meat of what is going on a lot of times, is that we, people like to accuse. All of us do, even I do. But anytime we're accusing of something, we're writing something off, whether it's someone who smokes or anything else, we're missing the heart of it, the reality of it, the reality of the people in the midst of it, whether it's one person or multiple people. Usually multiple, because even if there's one person in the middle of it, they still obviously are connected to other people, like this here. I mean, it's his mom, it's his family, siblings.
I don't get it, Mom. Don't you wanna watch your babies grow? I guess pills are more important. All you have to say is no, but you won't do it, will you? You gon' keep popping till them pills kill you. I know you're gone, but I can still feel you.
Man, that, as someone who has dealt with addiction before very heavily, it clearly isn't something that you can just say no to. I mean, you can say no, but it doesn't work. I mean, honestly, how it worked for me, and I'm sure how it works for a lot of people, is you tell yourself that you can say no, but because you're able to say no, you don't need to. Like, I have the ability to put this thing down, to walk away, but because I can, that means it doesn't have a hold over me, so, I don't need to put it down, it's fine. It's just recreational, it's just because I enjoy it, and we rationalize away our free will, or our choice anyway, just like that. So maybe the question of whether we can say no or not becomes irrelevant, because we don't say no. But I don't think, that's like the nature of it, right? Because addiction is something that we can't deal with properly, but we don't tend to admit to ourselves that it's a problem in the first place. And, but that doesn't, in a case like this, I think I've heard one reactor just kind of side with the mom and talk about this stuff, and how addiction is hard and you can't say no, and that he didn't have a place to be mad at her. Well, sure he does. Not that it's her fault, but it doesn't mean that you can't be angry. And that's the thing, anger and bitterness directed at someone, perpetually out of pride, out of ego, that's wrong and self-destructive, but anger just in the course of grieving, of mourning, it doesn't make sense. And it isn't empathetic. That's the nature of anger, right? It's the nature of mourning. It isn't rational. It isn't sensible. It certainly doesn't feel good. And, so no, the addiction at a certain point is not something you can do anything about with yourself anymore. But it doesn't mean someone is wrong to be angry with you over it, especially when you're gone. And all they have left is that memory of you and this yearning that there could have been something else. And clearly, there's always the thought that it was your fault, that you could have done something different. Maybe you could help. Maybe you could have, if you'd just been there, been more supportive, been more attentive. Even as a child to a parent, you still blame yourself. Certainly I have moments of, with my best friend who took his own life, I still think sometimes, well, maybe if I had just, I see these signs fairly, not that the signs necessarily pointed to that, but they were signs nevertheless. If I had just been more active, if I hadn't been so wrapped up in my own depression, in my own, melancholy, in my own dysfunction. But, anyway, I'm rambling here. Jeez, I forget, he's just a kid. He's younger than I am.
How could you leave us? How could you leave us? Why would you leave us?
Why would you leave us? How could you leave us? And just that sort of exasperated noise, you don't have words left, and it's just left. This is just it's like putting words to a feeling, but the feeling is so much more than the words. Because he misses his mom. He's not just mad at a thing. And that's where a lot of this comes from, I think, is, it's not just like a self-serving, like a prideful angst towards, addiction or pill companies or something. That's how it goes a lot of times with people who didn't really care for someone in the first place, that they were already too kind of focused on their own, whatever they had going on, family members, friends, whatever, people say that they're close, but they aren't really. And So he just misses what he had, and he misses what he knows that there could have been more of. And maybe back to the thing with the cigarette cell reminding of his mom, it's like, that's the thing when we're kids, even when things are really kind of horrible, a lot of times we don't notice a lot of it, we don't understand that it's actually bad, especially because we don't have an outside perspective on any of it. So you just go along, with your siblings, you hang out, you do stupid stuff, whatever, even as things are externally just, abusive and grotesque and relentless. And so it's almost like maybe there's this sense of remembering a thing, that the thing was bad, but that's not what it is in your memory. It's just the thing, and you end up being nostalgic for the time, even though the thing that reminds you of it isn't really a good thing necessarily.
I got this picture in my room and it kills me, but I don't need a picture of my mom, I need the real thing. Now a relationship is something we won't ever have, but why do I feel like I lost something that I never had?
Yeah, there was something that goes back to where in the first verse where he said, "You say you're proud that you don't know me that well," and that honestly, that reminds me most of this always gets me. My grandpa, especially grandparents, but I remember particularly my grandpa, who died when I was 13. He would always tell me that he was proud of me, that he and my grandma were proud of me, and I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. I didn't know, ins and outs, like I mentioned a minute ago about things. When you're a kid, you just deal with it. You don't realize that it's, even when it's like you can't deal with it, even when it's awful, you don't have the perspective to be able to say this is objectively bad. You just kind of get through it, and of course you blame yourself for anything that goes wrong a lot of times. And so when you're constantly told like you're not worth anything, or you're treated like you're not worth anything, that's what goes to your heart and your head. And so my grandpa would tell me that they're proud of me, and I think I would tell him that they shouldn't be? I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't say anything because I didn't know how, but I would think that, I really hope that I didn't tell him that they shouldn't be. I can't remember, honestly. But looking back on it now, since they were able to see from an outside perspective more of what was going on and what we kids had to and did go through for our whole lives, and that we didn't turn out worse. I mean, my sister has kind of unfortunately turned out worse later, but that's don't want to ever go into that. But yeah, that we got through school, we didn't really act up, we didn't really get in trouble, we had the grades, the whole thing. And I kind of doubt that that's what he was referring to when he said that he was proud of me or proud of us, that he and Grandma were proud of us. It's just for us being us and surviving and not being, loathsome, I suppose, which when you're a kid, I mean, you're not going to be anyway, you're just a kid, but yeah, just like it comes increasingly every time I think about it more, like just how much that meant. And right, why this was relevant was, I would think just along those lines, well, you don't know me that well, but you didn't have to, you didn't have to. And it's a little different in the case with an F, because it's like his mom just isn't, is there but not there. Just has kind of checked out, isn't really paying attention, as opposed to with my grandparents that paid attention, but we weren't around them very often. Yeah. Oh, what do? Hope I didn't.
You should have been there when I graduated. graduated. Told me you love me and congratulations. Instead you left us at the window waiting. Where you at, mom? We're too young to understand. Where you at, huh? Yeah, I know them drugs that got you held captive. I can see it in your eyes, they got your mind captured. Some say it's fun to get the high, but I am not laughing. And what you don't realize and what you're not grasping, that I was nothing but a kid who couldn't understand it. I ain't gonna say that I forgive you cause it hasn't happened. I thought that maybe I'd feel better as time passes. If you really cared for me, then where you at then?
Yeah. Man, I don't know. If you really cared for me, then where are you at then? Jeez, like, that's the thing about forgiveness, is it's weird. It's like no one really talks about it properly. You know, we always hear messages about how we should forgive people. But what I've found is that it really comes to down to a framing or a mindset, like, regardless of things that may or may not be forgiven. So if I can be in a mindset where someone's sin or wrongdoing is not against me personally, then there's nothing to forgive because it's not about me anyway. And, you know, that's been kind of a gradual work within me for a very long time, at least a number of years, and probably most of my life. Just, you know, for most of that time it was not a conscious thing, you know, that I realized or was able to talk about. But yeah, you take a case like this where again, he just misses his mom, and I don't think that the various manifestations of that should be faulted. I mean, if I were his therapist, and these are things that we would work through, but these are not things that I would accuse him of. You know, these are not things that I would tell him he's just doing it wrong, or blame him for the things that he's feeling. Even things that he's feeling, you know, at length for years. I don't know how long ago, you know, like, relative to this recording or the writing of this song versus when his mom passed away. I don't know the number of years of, you know, sort of corruption and corrosiveness in their relationship and in her that he's referring to. But yeah, it's almost like, and maybe this is part of, because, you know, how people treat forgiveness, because you always have the forgive and forget garbage. And, so forgiveness ends up being treated like you're supposed to act like the thing never happened, like everything is fine. And that's not what forgiveness is at all, even in a mindset like mine, where you're not taking something personally, so you don't have to forgive something specifically. Still, that doesn't, like, negate that something is wrong. It doesn't negate the harm that comes from the thing to the person that it comes from or to the people around them. It doesn't negate or cancel out any of these things. And I think far too often the inherent message to forgiveness is also necessitating forgetness. And so part of him saying that he probably won't or can't forgive his mother, I think is fairly likely, especially being a Christian and being to some extent in Christian circles and around Christian rhetoric, is very likely that to say, you know, the idea that he has a forgiveness means that he also needs to forget her, forget the pain, forget the loss, forget that anything was ever wrong, forget that there was ever a problem, and just go on like everything is fine, to move on as if she was never there, or as if she's only there in the past. Well, no, he needs and wants and longs for his mom now. He still wants a relationship with her, and it seems very likely, just given how the treatment is or tends to go, that he can't forgive her, because to forgive her from his understanding of forgiveness and from what he's, you know, advised from whoever, is to forget the pain, forget the emptiness, the loss, the longing, the mourning, the grief, to forget all of it and just happily move on. Like, no. Not only does Paul say to weep with those who weep, okay, the Lord weeps with us. continues to, and he exists outside of time, which means even after we sort of neglect or harden our hearts towards the pain of something, he still is living through and with that pain for us, even when we don't and when we do. And if the church, people in the church, and people everywhere could just get off this idea that forgiving means forgetting and forgiving means getting over something. Well, no, not at all. It just means that you understand that, one, the thing was not about you, the person who was wronged. It was about, the person who did the thing primarily. Because that's what sin is. It's not something that is about the person, someone else. It's just about the person who is crippled under the sin and, acting through it and with it. And if we could recognize this, just be a bit, like, there's so much selfishness in this view that people need to forgive and forget. There's so much selfishness in it because it's coming from an outside place of saying, basically, that everything is fine, and that as long as you have forgiveness, then everything will go back, like everything was fine and is fine and will go back to being fine once you hurry up and get over it and, let it go, so to speak. I mean, that term obviously is used far too often, I think. And that's, so for I think his name's Nathan, he can't forgive because it would mean having to move on from this part of himself and the relationship with his mother that isn't there, that he still yearns for. And I mean, this is what I would help him work through, is just differentiating between these things, between forgiving and forgetting, between moving on and grieving, between moving on and forgetting, and that you can function and still grieve, that you can live and not grieve and not forget and still feel pain and still mourn, that you can mourn the loss of someone your entire life and have regrets over things with them your entire life, but that doesn't mean you don't forgive them, and it doesn't mean you don't forgive yourself. It's just that grief, in the short term, the anguish of grief turns into just a longer term sadness, but it only goes away, I think, when you ignore it. But that doesn't mean it's going away, it just means you're ignoring it. And again, that's sort of what forgiveness has turned into, this sour sort of superficial thing of you just need to ignore it. Well, no, that's horribly unhealthy, and it's just not what forgiveness is.
Why would you leave us? Why would you leave us? How could you leave us? How could you leave us? Why would you leave us?
How many times, as kids, how many times are we just waiting for, our mom to show up and she doesn't, or she's late? How many times we're waiting for our grandparents to show up to just give some sort of solace from everything, especially me, and my sister too. And the times of dreading certain other people showing up, man.
Our last conversation, you and I sat in the living room talking about my music, and I brought you something to listen to.
Powerful.
You started crying, telling me this isn't you.
There.
A couple weeks later, guess you were singing a different tune. You took them pills for the last time, didn't you? They took you from us once, I guess they came back to finish you. Crying my eyes out in the studio is difficult. Music is the only place that I can go to speak to you. It took everything inside.
Yeah, that's it. You're in the depths of addiction, whether it's substance addiction or something like depression. Not that you're addicted to being depressed inherently, but the reality of being trapped and crushed, of being yourself, but so far away from the self that is the self that people see and that interacts with the world, it's like you're not even there. So like there's a little voice in the back of your head that, wants you to say things, to do things differently, to reach out to people, to treat them like you were once able to, but you literally can't. you can't bring that voice forward into an actionable thing and into an action. And so this imagery with his mom just like sitting there, and it doesn't look like the age of the woman and the age of him are that different, so it could be that that's a portrayal through the video to kind of show like this is him now and her as he remembers her. I'm not positive on that, but yeah. Right, something, I guess I'll mention it now, with the crying. This is something that a different someone reacting to the song mentioned. Like, yes, there's a choice to leave it in as a musical instrument, effectively, a musical, like, device, but that doesn't mean that's all it is. And I felt a bit of callousness from him, and maybe a lot of people anyway, would get that from the crying left in the song, that it's not professional, that it's just there for, emotional, like, impact, like, shock value or something. And maybe to some extent, but I think it's crucial to remember what music is. It's not, well, there's two ways of going about it, I suppose. There's the pure production, pure performance, pure show. And obviously that's the major problem in religious worship music, and maybe just music in general, mainstream music in general, but especially mainstream worship. But then there's what music is to the artist, to the, like, musician, not as a professional but as a person, that it is simply a vehicle to convey a message in a certain way. And any art is effectively the same in that sense, that any piece of art, whether it's music or a painting or a drawing or a theatrical production or whatever, is, yes, a production, but for the sake of conveying a message in a way, like, in a way that would not be able to be expressed in any other way, or at least not as well in any other way or medium, and B, to people that would typically not be able to hear it in any other medium, or certainly just through, conversation. So in a case like this, with NF, where he, claims to be real, maybe not in the song specifically, but it certainly is a theme throughout much of his music that I've listened to, this is the reality of it, that he opts to leave himself breaking down in the recording studio as part of the track, precisely because it is real. So yeah, he could have left it out and sacrificed it for the sake of production, for the sake of, having things be more clean and crisp and well-oiled and well-planned. But that's not this. And that's much of the point, I think, inherently in his thematic sort of constant message throughout much of his music, is that being real is not just the people who say they're real but aren't, but is actually making yourself vulnerable even to tens of millions. Well, this video has 61 million views, so hundreds of millions of people, presumably, who have heard this song. You make yourself vulnerable to yourself, primarily, and then to the people in the room, secondarily, and then to everyone else after that. That's what being real is. Now, it's not necessarily, there are nuances to it, obviously, and just venting about yourself is not necessarily being real either. So it's a great depth to what that means and looks like, and it, will look different for pretty much everyone. But regardless, this is just, honestly, I think him, like, a significant instance of him not being hypocritical. And I know maybe in the song, but definitely in others, where he'll talk about people being hypocritical, in part with reference to being real or not real. And this is just an example of him not being a hypocrite, but actually being real, despite that this is his job. But making his job about him being real and not just about the job.
I mean, I could scream at your funeral. Sitting in my chair, that person talking was pitiful. I wish you were here, mama, but every time I picture you, all I feel is pain. I hate the way I remember you. They found you on the floor. I could tell you felt hollow, gave everything.
That's it. Like, I hate the way I remember you. It's like I think that's a lot of what's going on here is why he refuses to forgive his mother, why he wants to just maintain this sort of moment of pain. Maybe he does maintain it. I assume he kind of wants to, in a sense, like, because he wants to remember her as something different. He wants there to be something else, something more. Like, one of the last memories of my stepdad that I have was walking into the bathroom with them naked and semi-conscious, sort of blubbering. Like, I don't want that to be a final memory. I don't want, like, one of the last memories I have of my grandpa was him having to be carried into the house with this foot infection, and he was in a wheelchair my whole life, but, like, he couldn't even, mixing that up, but, like, and you see people that you look up to, and then you see them broken down, and then them broken down is the last thing that you remember. It really, it hurts. And that's, I think, what NF is wanting to get away from. Like, he just longs for, even if just, like, a moment of his mom being there, just enough so that he can have a different memory of her, one that isn't of her, I don't know if it's her corpse physically, but, like, of her as herself, the her that he loves, and not the her that she became before she died.
Hate the way I remember you. They found you on the floor. I could tell you felt hollow. Gave everything you had, plus your life to them pill bottles. You gave everything you had, plus your life to them pill bottles. Don't know if you hear me or not.
Like, your life isn't something that's yours to give.
Why would you leave?
Or would just be everything you had, not everything you have and your life.
How could you leave?
In a sense, like, when you have kids, that is it. Like, your life isn't just yours, even when you have family. Generally, like, you've committed, and so your life is theirs and their life is yours too. It's all one. You're all in one life.
Sometimes I think about things like, when I have kids, and like, you won't be there. You won't be there for any of that. I'll never get to see you again. Sometimes I wish I would have just called you. I wish I would have just picked up the phone.
Yeah, that's it. Like, it doesn't matter if you didn't do anything wrong, you still feel like you did anyway. And it's just his process of imagining what could have been. I have a number of people that, especially some family members that who have passed away, or who I just will really probably never be able to have contact with again. And this is just it. You wish for something different. Not for someone else, but for the self, the person that you wish could have been that wasn't, whether they're still alive or not. And like, you can kind of grieve and cope, and you can kind of manage, you can kind of get along and kind of just struggle with things day to day, but when you sit down and start to think about what could have been, what should have been, maybe even, that's when it really hits. This is not exactly that, but I didn't know how to take my best friend dying. I didn't have a number of family members had died to that point, but I wasn't really terribly close to any of, my grandpa, my stepdad, okay, and some cousins too. So I take that back with the being close part, to some extent, but it was the scout meeting a week after he had died, and he and I had always, we had folding tables and folding chairs that we set up for every scout meeting, and everyone would set stuff up, but then everyone would just kind of leave without putting things away. So he and I were the two main ones that would put things away, but especially who would put the chairs away in one of those, long metal cart things that has folding chairs on them, and I would carry, 6 or 8 chairs at a time or whatever stupid thing, and because I was a bigger kid, now I'm just a bigger older dude, but I'd do that, and he'd jump in. He was very wiry, so he'd jump into the cart and ridiculously throw himself everywhere, trying to keep the chairs standing up before we could, until there were enough to keep themselves up, and even then it was just very overblown. It was it was ridiculous. So then that next week, when there was no Daniel to help, it was just me. That's when it hit, really, that it was just me, and he wasn't, and he would never be there again. So maybe this isn't imagining what could be, but certainly imagining what should have been. And I'm guessing everyone has a moment like that. Yeah.
You were here. I mean, you should have been there for us. You should have been here.
Pills got you right. And pills got you right.
I wish you were here.
She's that image of her smiling, if only that could be his last picture of her. If that would be how he could remember her, and not just this anguish of what should have been. And at a certain point, I think you kind of, just through maybe maturing in time, even decades, you can kind of filter and re-perspectivize and eventually just remember more of those better things. But it doesn't happen naturally, and I'm not also being prescriptive with it. I'm not saying that you have to make yourself get to that point. And I imagine for a lot of people it doesn't. Man. Anyway, I hope you guys, I don't know what else to say. I've been going for a while, so hope you guys are doing okay. I hope you made it through the holidays, the stress and the superficiality and the demands of, family and traditions and extended family and whatever else. I hope you made it, and I hope you're able to just find not a new normal, just a normal that is functional, a functional normal. I know we still have this quarantine stuff going on again, and again, as I've said before, just you have anything to say, even if you don't think it's that important, go ahead anyway. It's important because you want to say it, not because there's necessarily any great or wisdom or depth to it or anything. Even if it's something that people said you shouldn't talk about. I mean, this is the internet. It's anonymous. Obviously that leads to a lot of horrible things, but that also can lead to having an outlet where there isn't necessarily one too. So I'm still here. I'll try to get to stuff more readily and be on top of this more regularly, so that it can hopefully actually go somewhere and more people can just join in this discussion and realize that we're not alone in any of this stuff. So yeah, I don't know, subscribe, I guess, whatever, that's fine. And just be here, and we'll be together.